At Sierra, discover top workout gear at incredible prices, which might lead to another discovery. Your headphones haven't been connected this whole time. Awkward. Discover top brands at unexpectedly low prices. Sierra, let's get moving.
Hey there, travelers. Kaylee Cuoco here. Sorry to interrupt your music, great artist BT Dubs, but wouldn't you rather be there to hear it live? With Priceline, you can get out of your dreams and into your dream concert. They've got millions of travel deals to get you to that festival, gig, rave, sound bath, or sonic experience you've been dreaming of. Download the Priceline app today, and you can save up to 60% off hotels and up to 50% off flights. So don't just dream about that trip. Book it with Priceline.
Go to your happy price, Priceline.
Hello and welcome to Outward, Slate's podcast about the importance of eating 3 square gay meals a day. And what better place to break our daily bread than at the homosexual diner, the trans coffee shop, the lesbian vegan joint, and all the other places where our queer ancestors have flirted and gossiped and broken up and made up and cried on each other's shoulders over pork chops and tempeh burgers and a sweet and sour cabbage soup that tastes like home. I'm Christina Cauterucci, a senior writer at Slate, and I love a gay restaurant. Really, I love a gay anything, but there's something particularly homey, I think, about a place that serves food and a place where you can sit around a table and actually hear each other talk. But gay restaurants aren't always easy to identify, and if you're like me, you probably don't know much about their history. Gay bars are a much more common cornerstone of queer social life. They're where the parties are and where you'll almost always find people looking to make friends or hook up. But the LGBTs, we're only human. We need to eat. And for more than 150 years, we've been opening queer restaurants or commandeering straight ones to have our meals together. There's a new book coming out at the beginning of Pride Month that fleshes out that history in gorgeous, mouth-watering detail. It's called, appropriately enough, Dining Out: First Dates, Defiant Nights, and Last Call Disco Fries at America's Gay Restaurants. And the author, Erik Piepenberg, joins us this week to talk about how gay cafeterias and bistros and lunch counters and fine dining establishments have been essential to queer culture across the country. We'll also talk about what place they might hold in our lives today. We'll be right back with Erik after the break. Oh, Outward listeners, here's some scoop for you. So what is it, you ask? It's that Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. Now, before anyone goes suggesting this is just rumor, know that there's actual proof this kettle of tea is not only piping hot, but 100% true. So yeah, sometimes it pays to be a little nosy, but it always pays to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report. Learn more at discover.com/creditcard.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. From streaming to shopping, Prime helps you get more out of your passions. So whether you're a fan of true crime or prefer a nail-biting novel from time to time, with services like Prime Video, Amazon Music, and fast free delivery, Prime makes it easy to get more out of whatever you're into or getting into. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to learn more.
All right, here we go.
New Phineas and Ferb is here.
We're back, baby.
For 104 more days.
I know what we're gonna do today.
Of summer vacation.
I am ready for summer shenanigans. Let's do it. Oh, yeah.
All right. We're gonna bust Phineas and Ferb once and for all.
Are we gonna do this again?
New inventions, shenanigans, innators, adventures, and songs.
Brand new summer vacation.
New Phineas and Ferb starts June 5th on Disney Channel and next day on Disney Plus. On DisneyPlus.Disney.com.
We're back with Erik Piepenberg, the author of the new book, Dining Out. Erik, welcome to Outward.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
So I think it's obvious to many of us why gay people have gravitated to bars, but why do gay people need restaurants?
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction because we, for so long in the LGBT community, have valued bars as places where people can gather for friendship or romance or sex or entertainment. But really, the point of this book for me was to demonstrate the ways in which gay restaurants serve very different purposes from gay bars. They do things that gay bars just can't. You can have conversations where you can hear one another very easily at restaurants. It's okay if you go to a gay restaurant to cry on a friend's shoulder after a breakup. During the worst years of the AIDS crisis, gay restaurants became makeshift chapels for those who had died. And I think two other important distinctions about gay restaurants that I think really place them as important social spaces in the community is that you can be young, you can be a 14-year-old gay boy, and you want to hang out with your GSA friends and the drama club nerds, and you can go to a gay diner and you're welcome there. And you are too young to be able to do that at a bar. On the flip side, you can be a gay elder in your 80s and you don't want to go to gay bars because you don't feel welcome there. And you don't want to spend $25 on a fancy Cosmo and the music's too loud. You can sit at a gay restaurant with your friends or alone, and maybe they know your name and they know your order and they know how you like your toast. And so those are really important distinctions, especially in terms of age, that I found really sort of set gay restaurants apart. But really, no matter who you are or how you identify or what economic bracket you're in, gay restaurants are really places where queer people have found one another to make memories and cry and laugh and have fun over meals, which is food just does that. But for queer people, it's just a little bit different and safer.
Yeah, I mean, when I opened your book, I was thinking like, oh, I actually don't know if I've been to a gay restaurant, or I don't know if I know any gay restaurants. And you write about so many of them. And of course, once I started reading, I was like, of course I've been to a gay restaurant. In fact, I live in Washington, D.C., and I've been to Annie's, the one of the places that you write about visiting in your younger years when you were living in D.C. And I think I realized that gay restaurants can just be a little harder to identify than gay bars. I mean, how would you define a gay restaurant? Because they're not always the place that are queer owned or with rainbow flags out front.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I would say most of the restaurants that I write about in my book, and I cover about 100 years of gay restaurants, most of them, you might walk by them and not even recognize that you're at a gay restaurant. I define a gay restaurant, and I know this is going to sound like I'm being sassy here, but I'm actually not. I would define a gay restaurant as a restaurant where if you walk in and you open the doors, it's mostly gay people eating there. And I define it that way because, yes, you can have a place like Annie's. Those of you who know Annie's in DC, that is a gay restaurant. Inside, outside, you walk by that place, and this has kind of always, been the case as long as I've been going to Annie's. Rainbow flags everywhere. I remember back in the 90s when I lived in Dupont Circle, it was mostly gay men eating there. It's just, you can't help but see that the place is gay. But there have also been places, and I have a whole chapter on diners, and this is especially the case at diners, where that can change throughout the day. If you go there at midnight, it might be full of gay people, but if you come back to, let's say, a 24-hour diner at 10 a.m., it might be people getting off of the overnight shift, or it could be moms who drop the kids off from school, and then it goes back to being gay again at midnight. So, yes, a gay restaurant identity can be fixed. It can also be changing and cyclical depending on the time of day, and cyclical depending on the decade, even. I mean, Annie's wasn't always gay. It opened in the late 40s, and it certainly wasn't a gay restaurant then, but it became one starting around the late 50s, early 60s, and it just has stayed that way.
Yeah, can you share a couple different ways that a restaurant can become gay?
Yeah, I think for me, the example that I would give is one of my favorite gay restaurants is the Melrose Diner in Chicago, at the corner of Broadway and Melrose, for those of you who know Chicago, it closed in 2017, but it was around for 56 years. And it just happened to be at that location when Boys Town, as we called the neighborhood back in the 90s, started to gentrify, started to become gayer. And so a restaurant like the Melrose was just a diner, but it happened to be at the right place at the right time that it sort of began to attract the gay community. And look, restaurant owners have two choices. When that happens, you can either embrace the gay community and say, yes, welcome here. You are part of our community, which the Melrose did. And again, I should say, you walked by the Melrose and you wouldn't know it was gay until you walked inside and then you looked around. The other option is to say, no, we don't want you, gay community. And chances are good that you're not going to stick around very long if you don't welcome in the folks who are changing your neighborhood in that way, for better or for worse. And the Melrose did that. Annie's did that, and I think because of that, they stayed in business as long as they have. It's interesting. I wanted to get back to a point that you made, which is kind of funny. I would ask people that question, what is a gay restaurant? And many of them would say, I don't know. I'm not sure what a gay restaurant is. And then I would say, where did everyone go after the clubs closed? And then they would say, oh, well, we all went to this restaurant and we had pancakes and we were tipsy and I made out with this guy and it was steak and eggs. And then I went home at 7 a.m. And then I would ask, the next question is, what kind of a restaurant was that? Sure enough, it was a diner. So once you sort of explain to people, where did you go after the clubs, then all the memories start flooding out after that.
I love the concept of a gay restaurant and the way you write about it in this book, because it does seem like a mix of intention and kind of happenstance. And I expected the history that you write about to be mostly contemporary history, but you identify, one of the first gay restaurants in the U.S., Pfaff's Saloon, I think, which actually opened, not necessarily as a gay restaurant, but it opened in 1856. What is the story there?
Yeah, I think that's sort of me having a little bit of fun. I should say I am not a historian, so I approach this topic as a gay guy, as a journalist, as a guy who loves grilled cheese at diners. So that's my background. Maybe some Whitman historians would disagree with me, but I'm sorry if Walt Whitman and his lover went to a restaurant back then. To me, under my definition, he has queered that space, which is language that they didn't have in the late 1800s. The notion of being a gay restaurant wasn't a thing. But today, we have this notion of a space being queered. And I make the argument that if Walt Whitman was there, he has queered the space. And that is just one example of the ways in which gay people who have been going out to meet each other in public for a very long time have turned restaurants into queer spaces just because they were there and they showed up and they knew that people wouldn't bother them as long as they paid their bill and they didn't cause any problems. You could eat there and you have made a queer restaurant. And I think that sort of set the groundwork for outwardly more open gay restaurants to come.
I enjoyed the parts of the book which it's a lot of the book, where you put yourself into the story. It makes the book really vibrant. You can see how much you really, really love these spaces. Can you speak about any gay restaurants that are special to you? What do you love about this genre of space? And are there any ones that you went to for the first time that you really want to go back to?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but for me, I'm a diner gay, and so I think back to high school. I grew up in Cleveland, and again, I didn't have the language for this. I wasn't out, but looking back, when I hung out with my nerd, new wave, goth, drama club, music weirdo friends, we would all go to diners. My friend's diner, which is still open, Minerva Diner, which is long closed, but looking back, I remember sitting in those spaces and being deeply closeted, terrified of coming out, but thinking, "Oh, that boy's cute." The guy who looks like Morrissey in a new wave trench coat, he looks really cute. And oh, those two girls are making out. What's going on here? I didn't have an awareness, but being in this diner at 2 a.m. after some industrial concert at the nightclub that we used to go to down the street. Looking back, I realized that was an awakening of sorts for me to understand who I was, and a gay restaurant did that because I wasn't going to gay bars. I couldn't get in. I was scared to death to go to a gay bar, but being in this space with, I'm sure, other gay or deeply closeted people was really a milestone for me. The other place that I would say that is open now and that really surprised me was Napoli's Lounge and Grill in Green Bay, Wisconsin, which does not serve food from Nepal, just for the record. But NAPS, as they call it, has this monthly trans mixer where people from all over the region, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, come to gather as trans people, something that they can't do back home in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. You can't do that, but you can do that once a month at NAPS. And I have to say, being there was just a wonderful experience to see these people being their true selves, and also with a basket of crispy Wisconsin white cheese curds. I mean, I had never had cheese curds quite as delicious like that. So to meet these incredible trans folks and Martha, the organizer of this event, with I can't tell you how big this basket, the red basket with the gingham colored paper and the heaping mound of cheese curds. I was in heaven.
You mentioned that you're not a historian, but obviously you're digging up a lot of history here. And because queer people, aren't always recorded in the public record in the same way, you talk about having to extrapolate about the restaurant where Walt Whitman ate, you run into a couple situations where you're having to suss out the history for yourself. And you write about the legends of the queer riots that happened at Cooper's Donuts in LA and Compton's Cafeteria in San Francisco. The way people talk about these uprisings against the cops, I think I thought the facts of their history were kind of settled, but you write, they're really not. And, I'm curious, what did you find in your research and what made you still want to write about these restaurants, even when the major details of what might or might not have happened there are pretty blurry?
Yeah, I should say that I am not saying that they didn't happen. I hope they did happen. I hope I'm proven wrong that both of those events happened as people have said that they have. It's just that as a journalist, for me, I just wish that the evidence had been a little more solid, that these events happened, these pre-Stonewall uprisings happened the way that people have said that they did happen. The evidence is almost not there at all for Cooper Donuts. Even the family that ran Cooper Donuts says, we're not so sure that it actually happened the way that it did. Compton's Cafeteria, it's the same thing. There's a lot of oral histories. There is some written history, but it was written after the fact. So again, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I just think that as someone who cares about making sure that the evidence is there to say that it actually did happen, I just wasn't entirely convinced. That said, I think as the historian Lillian Faderman described to me, these are beautiful myths, and there's nothing wrong with that. And to say that, yes, there was a gay civil rights movement before Stonewall. This notion that Stonewall somehow started the gay rights movement is absurd and kind of offensive to say that. It does a disservice to the people who came before Stonewall and who did act up. And so I think the oral histories are very important, especially in terms of Compton's Cafeteria, and because they show that people didn't just sit back and take any harassment or violence from the cops or from law enforcement, that they did fight back. And so all of that is to say, the evidence may not be rock solid, at least for my needs as a journalist. But man, I love hearing the stories of what people did before Stonewall to make sure that the gay civil rights movement advanced.
Yeah, I mean, the restaurant, in those cases became political just because of who those people were and the way people were responding to them. Then there were gay restaurants that were sort of created as political spaces. I'm thinking about the specifically lesbian restaurants or, women's restaurants, as some of them thought of themselves at the time. A lot of these opened in the 70s and 80s. I loved reading about these restaurants because, I just feel like I can smell what they're like. You know, you write about them so vividly and they feel so familiar to me. Can you explain, what were these places, and what was it about their sort of utopian business model that made them so special? And how are they different from, maybe a gay male restaurant?
Well, as a gay male, I can tell you that the gay restaurants that I've gone to have been about who's there, who's hot, what the music sounds like, who can we cruise in the room. And I'm not saying that there haven't been
Classic.
political, there hasn't been political organizing at restaurants where gay men go, because there certainly have, but they are different than lesbian restaurants like Bloodroot in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And the Brick Hut in California. I mean, these restaurants had politics embedded into their ethos, and so and in many cases they were also vegan or vegetarian, meat free. So animal rights was very much a part of what these restaurants' identity, including feminism, including gay rights, and so that's a little bit different than the restaurants that I went to that were mostly gay men, because for these restaurants, especially in the 60s and 70s, it was all about being political, and it was about carving out a space where women could go and be apart from men and their nonsense, as I write about in the book, and just have a space that is just for women to come together and organize, but also have fun and to flirt and to do a lot of the same things that gay men did at their restaurants, but through a feminist lens. And yeah, if there's one era that I could go back to, it's Bloodroot in 1978, and just to sort of be a fly on the wall and sort of see the kinds of social justice concerns that were a part of every meal there.
And Bloodroot is still open today, right? I mean, you visited it for this book.
It is still open, still serving delicious vegan food. If there's one place I recommend people check out, it is Bloodroot, because there really is no restaurant like that. It is one of the last, if not the last, feminist, lesbian welcoming restaurants that opened in the 70s to still be in business.
That's incredible. Another sort of era where restaurants kind of evolved to serve the purpose of that was important to queer people of that time. Obviously, let me phrase this question in a different way. The purpose served by gay restaurants, I think, changes sort of in concert with whatever else is going on in queer life. They can change over time. They can change based on the communities they serve. But every queer history, yours included, has to contend with the impact of AIDS. How did AIDS affect the gay restaurant?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, and this is what I love about this chapter, it didn't. Annie's, for example, was a restaurant that welcomed gay people who were living with HIV or AIDS back in the day at a time when non-gay restaurants, in some cases, turned them away. And so I think gay restaurants in general were places that in those darkest years, people who were living with HIV and AIDS could go and be with friends and not feel like, and for one meal, for one night, not feel that they were being rejected in public. And so I think that's really an important thing to say about gay restaurants, that they did serve this incredible purpose during those horrible years. And unfortunately, they also served as chapels, as spaces for memorials for people who did die. Annie's was certainly the case. And I think that's a really important part of Annie's legacy, is that when other restaurants said, no, you are not welcome here, Annie said, of course you're welcome here. And I do have an entire chapter devoted to the ways in which those restaurants welcomed people. And also, I should say that gay restaurants also served as organizational hubs. I talk in the book about how ACT UP on Monday night, after their long meetings at the Gay and Lesbian Community Center here in New York, would go to a restaurant called Woody's and just keep the meeting going, because people are dying, and we can't stop talking about how to organize. So let's do it over a burger and fries in the basement of Woody's on a Monday night when nothing else is happening. During those worst years, gay restaurants also became activist centers, and in a way that we shouldn't shouldn't forget it.
I mean, some of the details that you unearthed from this period just were chilling to read. I think I didn't realize the extent to which there was a need for public service announcements saying, like, you can't get AIDS from eating at a restaurant, if somebody working in the kitchen has HIV, or, someone was fired from a restaurant because his partner had AIDS. Like the connection between food and eating in a public place and sort of the public conception of and stigma against people living with HIV seemed so fraught. And yeah, what was it like to sort of be reading those news articles and doing that research?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was young during those years, so I don't have quite the memory that older gay men do of that time. But there was just so much fear. No one knew how you got HIV or AIDS. So the idea that you'd go to a restaurant and maybe you could get it by eating off someone's fork, or if the waiter had a cut on his finger and he passed you a dish, that you would also get infected. People didn't know. There was just so much fear. And so it is amazing to see that public service announcement that the American government, it's hard to think of a government that might do that today, but back then put out these big posters and these big public service announcements that said, that is not how you get AIDS, is by eating at a restaurant or by playing in a playground. There were other messages to caution people against jumping to the assumptions about how you can get HIV. And so I think that was a really important moment and message. Did it always land with people? No. Fear is still going to overpower a lot of people's decisions. But the fact that the government felt that it was important to say that, maybe a little too late, some would argue, I think is still worth noting.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Erik Piepenberg.
This message comes from Greenlight. Ready to start talking to your kids about financial literacy? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app that teaches kids and teens how to earn, save, spend wisely, and invest with your guardrails in place. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Join millions of parents and kids building healthy financial habits together on Greenlight. Get started risk-free at greenlight.com/Spotify.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the U.S. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a U.S.-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
All right, we're back. Today, the most common association that people have with gay restaurants or gay meals is brunch. And I really enjoyed your chapter on drag brunch because I feel like I always go back and forth between, drag brunch, the sort of like sanitized, accessible version of gay culture often performed for straight people really grates on me. And on another level, I'm like, I don't know, is it sort of unavoidable that we have this easy way for straight people to sort of sample queer culture, and also drag still is beautiful and fun? Can you talk a little bit about your perspective on the drag brunch?
I have to say, I think you and I agree on all of those counts, and I think all of those can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
I love drag brunch, have been going to drag brunch for a long time, but I do appreciate a more X-rated naughty drag queen, which you tend not to get these days when you have, kids of all ages going to drag brunch, like I saw at Perry's in Washington, D.C., which is one of the, if not the longest drag brunch in the country is at Perry's in the Adams Morgan neighborhood. And look, the day that I went there, it was moms, it was little kids, it was birthday parties, it was mostly straight people. And on the one hand, that's fantastic. Drag queens are getting work and tips. That's fantastic. I would never say that that's a bad thing, but at the same time, it did sort of feel a little sanitized. I've sort of stopped going to drag brunches because I just find them kind of not what I wish they would be. But there's such a rich history of the ways in which entertainment, drag specifically, has combined with meals in the gay community that dates back way before RuPaul's Drag Race. And I talk about that in my book. But yeah,
yeah,
be
can you
careful
talk
what
a
you
little
wish
bit
for.
about that history, which is so fascinating?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I mean there have been one of my earliest drag brunch mentions, I think, is in the late '60s. It was probably just a bunch of gay guys in terrible wigs and some pancakes, maybe at a bar, and that's proto drag brunch, if you ask me. And so the idea that drag and meals can come together. I sort of date back to then, but really in earnest, it was around the early '90s that drag brunch really became a thing. And I argue that it was because of AIDS. Straight people would never go to a gay nightclub or bar at night to support causes on behalf of people with HIV and AIDS, but they would go to a breakfast with a fun drag queen and spend and donate money and give tips during the day. And so I think that is one way in which drag not only emerged into the straight community was because of the horrible first decade of AIDS, and the remnants of that, straight people coming to this sort of gay event, have continued for better or worse.
On the other end of that spectrum is a buffet served at a bathhouse. And, I think even before I read this book, I was thinking about whether gay restaurants could be sexual. I feel like you don't always want to eat like a huge meal before there's not really like a very there's a complicated relationship, I would say, between eating and sex. Did you find any sort of conflict or contradiction there? I mean, how does sex show up at a gay restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, look, it not to be crass, but it could be a quickie in the bathroom at a restaurant, and I write about that some. It could also just be flirtation. That the Eagle Bar here in New York City, which back in the '70s was a leather bar with strict dress codes about what you could and couldn't wear, had a restaurant. They would clear out the dance floor. They would put tables in, and they would have a very sort of white tablecloth, elegant menu of like steak and lobster and baked Alaska and just sort of like these aspirational meals. And then they would clear it out about 11 a.m. And then all the Leathermen would either, come in or stay after dinner, and it would turn into this bacchanal kind of bar. And so the two have lived quite literally in the same space. But to talk about Flex, yeah, a bathhouse is not a restaurant, but at Flex, it is serving a gay restaurant purpose by bringing together men over meals. And in a lot of cases, these men have nowhere else to get a home cooked meal, and so they may go to Flex every Sunday afternoon. Rick at Flex makes a home cooked meal. And every holiday, if you have nowhere else to go, you don't have family, you're estranged from your family, your partner has died, whatever the case, that you can go to Flex, and Rick's going to make you a home cooked meal with other people who you could sit there and talk with. And that may be the only home cooked meal that you get in a long time. And so I love that section on Flex because it just shows you the ways in which gay places can have the qualities of a gay restaurant. In this case, add in sex a little bit, and it can be a kind of gay restaurant.
Yeah, that was really, for me, kind of a surprisingly sweet segment of the book. I didn't expect to read about that. And, another thing that I was thinking about while reading the book is I feel like there's this sort of insulting cliche about gay men that like they don't eat very much, and certainly not while they're gay socializing, that gay men are like on strict diets, very body conscious, obviously talking about a specific stereotype of gay men. But I loved that your book challenges that, and you depict so many situations in which people are eating a lot together and not thinking about their bodies and how they look necessarily.
That's a great point. Look, as a gay man, you're absolutely right. A lot of gay men I know would never dream of going to a diner for grilled cheese and fries and rice pudding, which is my go-to order. Um, Not me. I was raised on diners. I am going to eat greasy food and cheese curds and whatever. That's just what I'm that kind of a gay. I am a diner gay. But yeah, look, I think that's the case maybe in Hell's Kitchen where I live, but in other parts of the country, yeah, no, people are going to have cheese curds and beer for a meal, and that's okay. And I should also say another kind of restaurant I talk about in my book are bars that serve food. Here in New York, there's Julius, one of the oldest gay bars in the country, that has a tiny, tiny little grill. You can get a burger, a grilled cheese, and fries, and it's an example of a kind of restaurant that is in many parts of the country, not so much here in New York, but it's a bar that just serves bar food, and I think that's lovely.
Yeah, you can also stay at a bar longer if they serve food, which I think is just smart for them.
That's exactly right.
I know you did a ton of archival research for this book. Obviously, it was a real treat to read about all the bits of ephemera you found, menus, advertisements. Is there any restaurant that you learned about that's no longer around that you really wish you could have gone to?
Yeah, I would say the one is Gallus in Atlanta, which sort of had a heyday in the late 70s, early 80s, and it was just kind of a one-stop shop for everything that a certain kind of gay man would need for in an evening. You could go and you could have a fancy dinner served by a waiter in a crisp white shirt, and your table would have flowers on it. And then you could sing show tunes with your friends, and then you could go in the basement and meet a hustler. I mean, all the things that you might want in one night sort of went in that order.
Incredible.
And it seemed fancy, but it also seemed kind of dangerous. Which, yeah, if I could take a time machine back to any restaurant and eat there and meet the hustlers and the lesbian bouncers who you did not want to mess with at all, it would be Gallus in Atlanta, that's for sure.
Yeah, I would love to visit. So there's been a few new explicitly queer restaurants opening up in recent years that look very different from the ones in the past. Are you optimistic about the future of the gay restaurant and specifically this kind of new breed that's starting to open up?
I'm very optimistic about the future of queer dining, and I call it queer dining as opposed to gay restaurants, which is just my sort of Gen X way of talking about the restaurants that I came of age with. But there is a new vanguard, I call it in my book, of queer restaurants that look nothing like the gay restaurants that I know, but that are much more queer and much more trans welcoming and welcoming of non-binary people. And the food in some ways reflects that, and the dining room reflects that. And I think there is a real thirst for that kind of third space notion of this isn't a bar, this isn't work, this isn't home. This is another kind of place, a restaurant specifically, where no matter who you are under the LGBTQ umbrella, you can find yourself there. You can find your people there. And by the way, you can have some really, really excellent food. And so I think, yes, the restaurants don't look like they did back in the day, but there's a new identity about these queer restaurants that I think is really really exciting to sort of see and to experience. They're also a little more political across the board than I think a lot of the restaurants that I went to. Back in the 90s, it was, a hot guy on your menu, and that's all that you needed to get into the door. But a lot of these queer restaurants, they're concerned about abortion rights and about trans rights. And And I think that was maybe less the case back in my day. So that's another reason why I'm excited to see the ways in which politics combine with this new type of queer restaurant.
Um, what is it about a gay restaurant that makes it last? Is there anything that, makes a gay restaurant likely to stick around until the next generation?
Yeah, the restaurant industry is a tough one, and I think it's tough for any restaurant to stick around. But I think in general, what I found is one of the things that has kept these legacy gay restaurants, as I call them, like Annie's in Washington, D.C., like Casita del Campo in Los Angeles, is familiarity and safety, and knowing that no matter who you are, your age, your income, no matter who you are, that you know that this is kind of a second home for you, and not just any second home, but a gay one or a lesbian one or a trans one, where however you identify. These are spaces where when you walk in the door, you see your tribes, and maybe they know you and you're a regular there. I can't tell you how many regulars have been going to Annie's for a very long time, and for Annie's to go away would be a real dispossession, is what I call it in the book. It's almost like this death. Where am I going to go to eat this meal? Where am I going to go to see the server who always says hello to me and uses my first name? And so I think familiarity, safety, and also comfort in food. And if you've been eating the same meal since the Ford administration, I mean, that's that's going to be hard to say goodbye to. And so I think you're going to keep coming back, and that means that you're going to hopefully keep that restaurant business.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to end, although I could be talking about queer food forever. Erik Piepenberg is the author of Dining Out, First Dates, Defiant Nights, and Last Call Disco Fries at America's Gay Restaurants. Erik, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this great conversation. I appreciate it.
That's all for our main show today, but there's always more Outward over in the Slate Plus feed. This week, Erik Piepenberg will stick around to help us update the gay agenda. If you're not already a subscriber, remember, by joining Slate Plus, you'll get ad-free podcasts, extra segments on all our shows, and you'll never hit a paywall on the Slate site. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of the Outward show page. Or visit slate.com/outwardplus to get access wherever you listen. We always love to hear your feedback. You can send us a note and any ideas you have for topics you want us to discuss at outwardpodcast@slate.com. Our show is produced by the actually gay drag brunch, Palace Shaw. If you like Outward, please subscribe in your podcast app. Tell your friends about it and rate and review the show so other people can find it. Stay gay, everyone.